Hey guys, so the title of the talk today is Why Sustainability Will Not Provide Us with a Desirable Future. And this talk was inspired by Alan de Botton, credit where credit's due. So let's jump into it. So, if I was to give my own personal definition of sustainability, I would say that it means to become comfortable in uncomfortable situations. So when we're addressing topics like injustice or suffering or ecological destruction, these things are typically categorized as depressing subjects. But I would disagree. So the way subjects are categorized is often influenced by the systems of power and are shaped by these trillion-dollar propaganda machines designed to keep us numb. So if you feel the weight of, this discussion and choose to lean in, it's probably because you care deeply, not because you're depressed. So like, congratulations, the trillion-dollar propaganda machines bombarding us with these notifications and content to distract us. And it didn't work on you. So good for you. Well, the depression you feel, if you're feeling it, it's a necessary component of social change. So like, what is depression? Well, in my opinion, depression comes from being so attached to a particular outcome that when things don't go the way that you want, reality becomes unacceptable. But that's okay because, the reality of the current state of the world and with all its ecological destruction, it is unacceptable. So it's okay to feel a little disappointed about this one, guys. It's okay. I'll give you a hug. Uh, so like if depression, it's a form of insecurity. And if you feel insecure right now, that's totally normal. What's far more terrifying is people who have like zero F's given and don't seem to like care about this. It's wild to me. So it's no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society. Your depression, pain, anger, sadness, whatever you're feeling, they're expressions of your humanity and your sanity, and therefore your health. So the pain you feel can be this tool wielded for passion, action, and can be used as fuel to make creative solutions. That's what we're here for. So like if you scratch just beneath the surface of any person experiencing anger, sadness, or depression about the environmental crisis, you'll find this like wild optimist that holds this curious but reckless hope in a world where things are better or can be better than they actually are. So you see, depression is rooted in hope. Therefore, if we can diminish our hopes a little bit, then we can turn sadness into grief. And that will be a psychological progress as we will come to see. So my task for today will be hopefully letting your hopes down as gently as possible. So, one of the central tenets of Buddhist philosophy is the idea that attachment to anything, especially particular outcomes, will always lead to disappointment. Essentially, attachment to anyone or anything is a form of insecurity that sets us up for disappointment because it externalizes our happiness and bases our worth on external validation. And enlightened people, I'm not one of them, I guess their validation comes from within or whatever. So, as most of us know, this happens all the time in relationships. We think we found the perfect person. We build them up in our heads. We get attached and then we get let down and we get our hearts broken and we hit rock bottom. And a few months later, we're back in line for the roller coaster all over again. So this goes the same for how we approach the environmental crisis. We believe we've found the perfect sustainable solution, carbon capture technology, or this emissions reduction strategies, or whatever people come up with lately, and we think it will alleviate our concerns about the future, but more often than not, it doesn't. So we assume that sustainability will usher in this utopian future, but it won't. This is because just like relationships, it demands compromise, realism, and living with imperfection, which is something human beings are appallingly bad at. So getting attached to the fantasy of perfection, like it's romantic, it's sweet. We envision this green future and it's perfect. We have pristine oceans and renewable energy sources everywhere, these thriving green cities with skyscrapers with vines crawling up them. Harmony with nature is beautiful. The problem is that this ignores human psychology. So, one of the reasons the environmental crisis is so tricky is that we can't solve it by ourselves. It requires us to do something we really don't want to do, which is to approach other human beings and say, I need you. I wouldn't survive without you. I'm vulnerable without you. However, there's this strong impulse to be well defended and well guarded and never show our vulnerability. And it's precisely at that moment that you do that you get hurt. So I need to be real with you for a minute here. I don't like the word vulnerability. I don't like vulnerability. And I'm using the word vulnerability here a lot, and it needs to come with a disclaimer. I'm not advocating for us to be vulnerable in the traditional sense of like being vulnerable with each other in our relationships. Uh, I don't recommend that. This type of vulnerability is often espoused by like self-help experts, and personally, I've found this to be particularly bad advice. However, I am advocating for a different kind of vulnerability, which I will call eco-vulnerability. And the name is pretty self-explanatory, but it can be described as vulnerability within the relationship between human beings and nature. So, uh, you know, I'm not advocating for you to show this in your love lives. I'm advocating for you to be vulnerable with your surroundings. So our understanding of love is pretty limited. I know mine is. We often assume love is this instinct that occurs naturally, but in reality, it's a skill that needs to be learned. Yet we tend to overlook love as a skill, which this hinders our growth. So without actively developing the ability to love, we stay isolated in these personal silos of frustration, believing that the collective issues that we face as a society are solely our own. And this perspective leads to feelings of loneliness and helplessness, especially with the environmental crisis. And we prefer it this way because it's more comfortable to be alone than it is to be vulnerable. In fact, it is a mistake to express the wholeness of your vulnerability. We tend to believe that love means accepting the whole of who someone is. It doesn't. No one should accept the whole of us. We are appalling. The full display of who we are is not something we should ever do in front of anyone we care about. Therefore, if we cannot be vulnerable with each other, which we can't, then we certainly can't admit how vulnerable we are as a collective species. And without vulnerability, we become detached from our capacity to love in a meaningful way. So remember the theme of the discussion, why sustainability will not provide us with a desirable future. Well, this is precisely why. But let's dive down a little deeper. So psychologists talk about two patterns of response whenever there's a danger of needing to be vulnerable or extremely vulnerable with another person and expose that to them. And the first response is for people to get what psychologists call anxiously attached. This is attachment theory, as some of you may know. And I'm going to try something new here and attempt to analyze the environmental crisis through the lens of attachment theory. So, when you are anxiously attached to somebody, rather than saying to them, I need you, I depend on you, you start to become very procedural. You start to make YouTube videos about recycling or rant to your neighbors about why chemical lawn fertilizers are bad for the environment. You start to get very strict when, in fact, what you need to do is ask a very poignant question. Do you care about me? Do you care about the environment or the future? But we don't dare ever ask these questions. So instead, we feel overwhelmed, we become passive aggressive, we become stiff, and we get procedural. So the other pattern of behavior which psychologists have identified is what's known as avoidant attachment. Uh-oh. Which means that when you need somebody or you feel overwhelmed, it's precisely at this moment that you pretend that you don't or you're not. So when you feel the most vulnerable, you say, I'm fine, thanks. In other words, you don't reveal the need for another person. So there are two other attachment styles which psychologists have identified. One is secure attachment, which are just normal people who aren't insecure. I actually met one once. Up to 50% of people claim to have secure attachment styles. But what this actually probably means is that up to 50% of people are lying to themselves. And the other is disorganized attachment, aka fearful avoidant, who make up about 5 to 10% of the population. So disorganized attachers or fearful avoidants are extremely confusing because they are both anxious and avoidant at the same time. For the sake of time, we will not dwell on secure or disorganized attachment styles because they are a whole can of worms. And so for now, we're just going to focus on anxious and avoidant. So What anxious and avoidant attachers have in common is an issue, is that, we all have a tendency towards addiction, no matter who you are. Not in the usual sense of like drug use, but this type of addiction can be more accurately defined as any pattern of behavior that makes it easier to be comfortable being alone with yourself. Anxious people all share the same core wound of fear of abandonment. When this core is triggered, anxious people need to work through the feelings as quickly as possible to make them go away. When anxious people feel abandoned, they suffer from symptoms similar to withdrawal of drug use, for example, like cocaine withdrawals or I don't know, whatever other drugs. So, anxious people tend to overthink their emotions and search for patterns to alleviate the anxiety as quickly as possible. Essentially, anxious people run towards their emotions to work through them in order to survive discomfort. On the other hand, avoidant people, they run away from their emotions in order to survive discomfort. But the problem here is that you can't run forever, and eventually those unprocessed emotions catch up with you. Uh, so the avoidant core wound is the fear of loss or of betrayal. Uh, and when this core wound is triggered, uncomfortable thoughts and feelings can arise. So they seek distractions, they avoid facing their feelings. This means that anxious and avoidant people can become addicted to anything so long as it keeps them from being alone with their uncomfortable thoughts. And thanks to modern technology, we can create lives where we're never truly alone or with our thoughts or feelings. Unfortunately, this can harm our ability to build meaningful relationships with each other and in turn affect our relationship with nature. So, how can attachment theory be applied to how human beings address the environmental crisis? Well, if half of people are anxious and the other half are avoidant, and then there's a small percentage of people who are both, really messed up. This creates a psychological feedback loop where the anxious person breaks out the picket signs and starts pushing harder for change, which triggers the avoidant person to become more avoidant. And it creates this cycle of low trust where we get into patterns of not doing the things that we really need to do. Essentially, anxious and avoidant people are really bad at setting boundaries. Yet, the environmental problems we face are the result of not properly setting boundaries around consumerism and resource extraction or the economy as a whole. So, setting these boundaries with each other and the economy will require us to break these push-pull patterns between anxious and avoidant people that get us to stop pushing and running away from each other. It's a terrible game of tag. And I'm not saying that one attachment style is better than the other. Both attachment styles are rooted in insecurity, and when we learn to set boundaries, we become secure in our attachment style. So, how does one go from being anxious or avoidant to secure? Well, I have an insecure attachment style. I'm not there yet. I'm not going to pretend I know. I'm guessing it's through vulnerability that we can accomplish this, but I'm not going down that road again. So, uh, what we actually probably need to do, my best guess, is say like to people, even though I'm a grown adult and I can grow like most of a beard and I've been alive for however many years, I'm 6 feet tall, etc. Uh, I'm actually a small child, and I need you like a small child needs its parent. But this is so humbling that most of us refuse to ever take this step, including myself. So, based on attachment theory, much of our understanding of love originates from early childhood experience. Uh, During childhood, our concept of love is shaped not only by the kindness and tenderness of our parents, but also these feelings of disappointment, humiliation, parents scolding us that made us feel small, or bullying. My bully was a girl. Her name was Gabe White. So, in essence, from a young age, our experience of love are intertwined with different forms of suffering. As we enter into adulthood, we're on this quest to find the search to find people who make us feel happy, but for some reason, we're not. This is because we're actually on a quest searching for someone who makes us suffer in ways that feel familiar to the different kinds of torture we experienced as children. And to suffer in familiar ways makes us feel that love is real, and this radically undermines our capacity to love one another in a meaningful way. So we think we're meant to like follow our hearts. And however, if you continue to follow your feelings, you'll almost certainly make the biggest mistakes of your life. Human nature, has this hardwired to run away from pain and just run towards pleasure. And our feelings tell us that love should never feel like pain. But this simply isn't the case because everyone we know is going to let us down at some point. Love is ultimately to have the willingness to interpret someone's on the surface, not very appealing behavior in order to find more benevolent reasons why it may be unfolding. In other words, to love somebody is to apply generosity when interpreting their behaviors. So, most of us are in dire need of love because we need someone to cut us some slack sometimes. Because human behavior is so tricky that if we don't do this, we wouldn't make it through the day. But we're not used to thinking that cutting slack is the core of what love is, or generously interpreting someone's bad behavior as well-intentioned, because we are generally very bad at recognizing that all human beings are this perplexing mix of good and bad. Like, nobody's perfect. We all do things that have negative consequences on each other and on the environment, me included. So it's pointless to go around blaming others or pointing fingers for the environmental mess or the failing relationships we found ourselves in. And it's a psychological achievement to understand that nobody's perfect. Maturity is realizing that there are no heroes or villains among human beings. We are just this perplexing combination of good and bad. And true maturity, I'm not there yet, uh, is the realization that any path we choose is going to be this mixture of good and bad. So solutions we choose to tackle the environmental crisis cannot just be admired for their strength. There also must be a tolerance for weakness and recognition of ambivalence. We are all going to question whether or not we made the right choice, choosing one path over another. And as a species, we've made some stunning mistakes. So what I mean is that we will not find the perfect path forward to a desirable future. We will probably do a little bit of suffering along the way while we figure it out, but we'll probably find the good enough path forward. And this is a success, as we will come to see. So why do we make these mistakes? Well, as I said before, it's because we have been told to follow our instincts and our hearts. We often prioritize emotions over reasoning and analysis, but there is no such thing as overthinking your emotions. And depending on your attachment style, you will either overthink or distract from your emotions, which are both forms of suffering. To admit that you are suffering requires vulnerability, and we don't do that around here. We believe that when something is right, we won't have to explain how we feel or what upsets us or what we want. The right person should be able to just guess what's on your mind. It's a romantic idea, but it's catastrophic to our ability to form meaningful relationships with each other. So if you don't explain, then you can't be understood. And to be understood is to teach. Teaching is a skill that gets an idea from one person's head into another, and most of us are terrible teachers. We usually teach when we're frightened. We are frightened of paying the bills, making rent, losing our jobs, losing our partners, wondering if your partner's an idiot, securing a better future for your children, and doing this all in a failing economy while the environment collapses around us. It's terrifying. We are so frightened that anxious people, we start to argue, we start texting or whole paragraphs, and this triggers avoidant people to run away. And in the process, you've made them feel small, and the lesson was over before it began. So there are plenty of great ideas for a better future that are promoted by bad teachers. I'd like to present Exhibit A and vice versa. Essentially, we need to be willing to teach and learn from each other, or we will continue to be lonely and unhappy. We believe that when somebody is telling us something about ourselves, that they're attacking us, but in reality, they're just trying to make the world a better place. So we need to accept that, the person who's trying to educate us, this isn't a criticism, they're just trying to make the world a better place. But we tend to reject this idea very strongly. We This makes it very difficult for us to teach and learn from each other. So is there any hope for us? Of course there's hope, but not the kind you hope for. Notice I used the word good enough earlier. Good enough is this wonderful phrase. I love it. It's a relief from perfection. You know, uh, the good thing is that none of us are perfect. So, therefore, we don't need perfection. And demanding perfection will only lead you to one thing, loneliness. You cannot have perfection and company. To be in company with others is to negotiate imperfection every day. Sustainability is a constant negotiation between humans, the environment, and the economy. And these three things seem to be highly incompatible at the moment. But hell, we're all incompatible. Compatibility is an achievement, not something found at the outset of a carbon reduction strategy or a first date. It is love as a developed skill that enables us to graciously accommodate each other's incompatibilities. Compatibility requires mature negotiation on a daily basis and understanding that we probably won't get what we want. However, you can change how you respond to getting what you want. And we usually respond in ways developed in early childhood. We rattle, we cry, we bang, we do whatever babies do. Uh, and we think it's going to help. It doesn't. But we can have a more mature response to the challenges presented to us. And this is an immense step forward. So the other thing we can do is recognize our ability to compromise. And this might feel shameful to say that we have yet to ban plastic bags or the clothes you buy are from Shein or Temu, uh, or to say, you know, this is Joe. I'm pretty messed up and he was the best I could do, so I compromised on my relationship. But again, nobody's perfect, and compromising on our relationship is noble. We compromise in every area of life, and we compromise in sustainability all the time. The UN creates mandates, policies, agreements, and treaties all the time. None of these international compromises are perfect by any means. And there's always one side of the aisle that doesn't get exactly what they want, but it's a massive achievement to make these compromises. So sustainability is this long-term commitment with imperfection. We need to realize we need resilience, flexibility, and acceptance, not fantasies of a frictionless future. This is what secure attachment to the future looks like, I think. Uh, the mature question isn't how will sustainability make the future perfect? The mature question is how will sustainability make the future good enough, knowing it will sometimes feel uncomfortable or incomplete. At the end of the day, we're going to make a whole bunch of bad decisions along the way. And if we're lucky, we might make some good ones too. But good or bad, we will regret whatever decision we make anyway, because hindsight's 2020. And it's human nature to regret the decisions we make. Even the good ones get compared to the fantasy of perfection. But it's important to recognize that the phantom perfect future isn't going to magically appear. But the good enough future is probably like just within our grasp. It's probably standing just beyond the walls of self-protection and inability to be vulnerable that we surround ourselves with. It's searching for cracks in the armor that we have isolated ourselves in so that we can survive another day. But this armor was only built for short-term survival. And if we want to build something lasting, the metal suits of armor need to come off and the walls have to come down. And I don't blame anyone for doing what they need to do to survive. Human beings are wired this way. I'm not asking you to be vulnerable or mushy because that is not something an insecure attachment style is capable of. I'm asking you to be more open to the idea of figuring out a way to feel a little bit more comfortable in uncomfortable situations, which is the definition of sustainability I gave you at the beginning of this lecture. There are a number of reasons why sustainability is going to let us down, but realistically, I must say it won't be that bad. So in conclusion, will sustainability provide us with a perfect future? Absolutely not. Will it provide us with a desirable future? Almost certainly not. However, it probably will provide us with a future that's good enough, and that's good enough for me.